really big way that we give back to the design community at IIDA, and we just want to first give a big shout out to our sponsors. Our 2018 chapter patrons, Level 1, are Mohawk and Arper. Chapter patrons, Level 2, Hayworth, KBM, Hogan 2. And then we have some event sponsors as well. Level 1 is Symantec, Encore, AMA Services, Dome Construction, and then event sponsors, Level 2, Techno Spa and Pair. And also, by coming to this event, you're helping us contribute to our City Center beneficiary, Food Runners. That's our 2018 charity, so thank you all for coming.
Well, we're really excited about our panel this evening. We wanted to provide a perspective on wellness from many different viewpoints, and we were really fortunate to have such a great group up here. First of all, we have Lisa Bottom. She's with Vice President and Principal with AECOM and brings over 30 years of experience as a designer, leader, and teacher in our industry. And next to her is Mara BAUM, HOK's wellness leader and a WELL faculty member and FitWell ambassador. She brings a perspective of the designer to this discussion and brings years of experience implementing sustainable and wellness initiatives, and as well understands the cost of those, so she'll have an interesting perspective on that. Next to her is Mark Strauss. Mark is the Senior Strategic Advisor for the International Wellbeing Institute. He's going to provide us that inside scoop for the WELL program, so we're very excited to have real understanding of how that works and is implemented. And then next to him is Cristina Banks. Cristina is our academic. She's the director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces. She'll share her perspective and has over 40 years of research in this field, so it's going to be very interesting how she understands from the research side. And then at the end is Becky Laden. And Becky is the Senior Global Workplace Strategy Leader at Symantec. And Becky has implemented WELL, so she has a great perspective on how the program really works in the field. So we're really excited, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Lisa, who will get started.
Thank you. So what a great panel we have. We've got all the experts up here, and I'm going to ask each one of you, in 2 minutes or less, get a little feedback, thanks. You know, wellness is very, very subjective. And I know at least 3 out of 4 of you are in the process of trying to figure out how to make it less subjective. But I would love to get your definition, each one of you, of what wellness is. And again, if you can keep it to 2 minutes, that would be great. Who wants to go first? Shall we have you go first?
I'll take it. Yeah,
Yep.
Sure, I'll take it. Thorn among the roses I've been described as, by the way.
I said it.
So let's a little bit start with the target of everything around that word called well to me, and that would be health, wouldn't it, right? And so the definition of health by the World Health Organization is that state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not necessarily, the absence of infirmities or illness, right? Now, what wellness is more or less sort of a bit of a process of searching to have that more optimized state in the mission to find that well-being or health. That's how I define it.
Well, you stole
Uh-oh.
my answer.
But no competing.
No,
competing.
great minds think alike, I guess. But the World Health Organization is really the gold standard for defining what wellness is all about, and I just want to put an emphasis on it that it's physical, mental, and social in nature, and we just tend to focus on the physical. And in addition to that, I want to distinguish it from well-being, though it's hard to do that. But one favorite definition that I have on well-being is that it is a positive mental, physical, and social state that happens when 3 conditions are met. that basic needs are met, individuals achieve a sense of purpose, and third, individuals are capable of attaining important goals. So it's just bringing more definition around that.
I share, can you hear me? Oh, there it goes. I share similar thoughts that it's really more about the holistic person and your mind, body, and soul, and being able to, it's all the things that you're eating and working on, and are you doing things that you're passionate about, and wellness are the things that help you get there. So when we talk about wellness in the workplace, it is wellness in the workplace, and these are programs that we do because we care about your overall well-being.
Well, I was also planning to quote the World Health Organization, so we've gotten that out of the way, right? I do think it's important that in our industry, we have a really good understanding of that differentiation between wellness and well-being, because a lot of us, myself sometimes included, tend to use those words a little bit interchangeably. Wellness does root back to health and the notion of being well, while well-being, in addition to all of the other really great definitions you just heard, I think of also being as more of a transient state, a state of being, and the state of being well. So it also incorporates mood. That's more of a colloquial definition. You wouldn't find that in the WHO dictionary. But as a result, well-being can be more directly impacted on a minute-to-minute basis by your physical environment and every other factor. We also tend to use well-being a little bit more broadly, like financial well-being or a community's well-being, that is a little bit looser compared to the way those of us in this room might think of well-being. But I will also share a kind of a personal story. The phrase health and wellness is in my job description, and we made up that job about 1.5 years ago at HOK, which incited an interesting debate. Should it be health and wellness or health and well-being? I did a little bit of very informal, not quantitative, highly not rigorous research into what people thought about those phrases. And it turned out that because I do a chunk of my work is within the healthcare industry, designing hospitals and whatnot, that population felt like the word well-being was too floofy, direct quote, too floofy. And so even though we felt like well-being was actually more technically accurate for the position, we didn't want to alienate folks in hospital and other healthcare environments. And so we went with health and wellness. So I thought that was an interesting state of the world at that point in time. Maybe someday.
Well, thank you. I think perhaps we were anticipating very different answers, and y'all are very, very closely aligned in terms of how you see it. So I'm going to throw a new question in that was not part of the prep, because I don't know as much as I'd like to. And one of the questions that I asked as I was getting ready for tonight was, and many of you may have this same question, so I'll ask it for you. I'll ask the dumb question. What is the difference between well and fit well? And any of you can answer that question as you like.
Fit well's a lot easier.
Do you have a maybe a broader definition of what the two programs are?
I was going to let Mark.
Where they came from? Okay.
I was going to turn it over to Mara.
Yeah,
Right.
I think
Because you could be a little more clinical, and I could be like
Okay.
directional, maybe.
All right.
Yeah.
So I do use both fit well and well, and they are both great tools for specific purposes. Well is a very detailed look at design, construction, and operations that includes an in-person assessor who comes and tests the air quality and water quality and acoustics and lighting. And it's very much about the results and the performance. Because if you're talking about health and well-being, we are really rooted in results. You know, having the intent to do something isn't necessarily the same as actually being very, very clear that you've achieved a certain level of performance. Fitwell was originally developed as a guideline for commercial office buildings, it was developed with the CDC and GSA, so for federal office buildings predominantly initially. Now it's branched out since then. And it was designed to be a tool that facility managers could use to do kind of some benchmarking. Originally, it wasn't actually a rating system. It was a benchmarking tool that facility managers could use internally to gauge kind of where they fell on the health and well-being, or health and wellness, whatever you want to call it, spectrum. And so, but because, as it turns out, our industry really likes rating systems, God knows why, they, due to popular demand, they turned it into a rating system. But it really is kind of more oriented towards operational use and a benchmarking system for operations. There's a little bit of design here and there, and certainly designers can use it. It's not, it's not impossible. But it leaves a lot out. So if you're really focused on the design process, it misses a substantial chunk of the issues that we as design practitioners would want to implement in order to create a healthy space. It is, as a result of that, it is quote unquote easier. It is also, depending on the circumstance, actually I think in almost all circumstances, probably cheaper. And so I think that is the primary reason that it has gotten some momentum, is that comparatively, because when you're not sending someone on site to do air quality, water quality, et cetera, testing, of course it is going to be cheaper. And for many people, they may not be ready for that yet. And so Fitwell might be a little bit of an intermediary point. Did I get that okay?
You got that better than I could have gotten that, absolutely. So my take on it from a well perspective, and for all of us being here, wanting to see about this whole movement towards quantifying health and wellness and well-being, to use all of the words, within the built environment, we love all of the above. This is a movement, this is a new perspective to see how can we, in particular in the design community, take a hold of what's happening culturally that's even much broader than our arena. We like Fitwell. We like anything that adds a perspective of how can we make the buildings that we're building, what are the mechanisms to make them even healthier. I would define sort of a differential in maybe the same sort of a way as when first there was no lead and then there was a lead. And so all of a sudden there was a lead and people were screaming about how hard and rigorous and different this thing was. And then people more or less got on board, and now lead, let's just say 20 years later, is just almost not necessary in a lot of cases because designing for sustainability is mainstream. So WELL is somewhat rigorous, and it is performance-based. And the amount of science, we were just talking about the amount of science behind it and the amount of PhDs and building scientists and medical experts at Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic is pretty incredible. It took 6-7 years and X number of tens of millions of dollars to develop this standard. What should light be so that we can sleep better? It's not an easy thing to come up with. So at any rate, WELL hopefully got the best science from all these different arenas, put it together, and created a rating system that judges and gauges performance that's much more research-based. And that's very, very different. And again, we love everything that helps quantify how we can get to a more well-being orientation in space. It's much, much different than where Fitwell is. Including many of the standards that are included, such as nutrition and others like that. Yeah.
I do want to add, Fitwell is absolutely research-based, but it looks at a more narrow sector, particularly for the design and construction portion of the building. It looks at a much more narrow sector. Actually, when it first came out, I used to joke that it was more fit than well, because something like over half of the points that you can get from it can come from location, transportation, opportunities for exercise and that type of thing. And so that really dominates Fitwell, and that definitely plays an impact in our health. If you were to listen to the Fitwell Ambassador training video, which is only 1 hour long, so you could actually do that, it would tell you that Fitwell was developed with the intent of trying to guide behavior within the building. So it wasn't actually intended initially, and it really still isn't, to give us a guideline for how to create a building that in of itself is a healthy environment, but it's trying to guide behavior within an existing building. And so that, I think, is also an important differentiation.
Thank you so much. How many of you, I want to see a show of hands, how many of you just learned a lot about Fit Well and Well? Okay, everybody here, great. Has anyone used either system on a project? We've got 1, 2, 3, okay.
Like half of those are my team members.
Not as many hands. Okay, all right. You guys are shills, you can't raise your hand again. Okay, so let's talk about how do we measure wellness? And I'm actually going to start with you, Cristina. Question for you is, what is your perspective on information gathering and research? How do you measure wellness in a way that's meaningful? What are your processes? I'll let you take it from here.
Well, most of the wellness instruments that are out there are subjective in nature. People self-report the degree of wellness, and it's broken down in a lot of different ways. And they're still useful because self-reported productivity, effectiveness, feeling satisfied, and so on, those kinds of measures that are subjective and self-report type actually do have great congruence with objective measures. So they're not bad, they're good, and they're a good litmus test as to whether things are going in the right direction. What we intend to do at the Interdisciplinary Center is, since we're focusing on basic needs, we like to think about it in terms of the gap between the satisfaction that people want and the satisfaction they're actually getting. And you can do that across the basic needs. And the importance of that is you can zero in on where the hotspots are in the organization. And it's not just what is happening in the physical environment, but it's also what's happening in the organizational environment. We also have ties to different design qualities that when you identify what need is really lagging behind the others and people feel it's important, you can look to these design variables that can actually build it back in or change the situation so that people have the experience of greater satisfaction. And if you will, I can name some of these design variables, and these are not going to be unfamiliar to you at all. But the twist that we put on this is its connection to the basic needs. So, for example, connection, social connection. We know that that's really a powerful design variable and breeds a sense of belonging in people and all sorts of positive emotions, which are some basic needs that all of us want in our lives. Extroverts more than introverts, but nonetheless, it's something that's basic to all of us. Comfort is another. And it's not just physical comfort, it's psychological comfort. Predictability. Now, this is one that is kind of new, and that is wherever you go, wherever you're trying to work, things happen the way you expect them to happen. And the Wi-Fi works. The person you need to talk to is reachable. The meeting room that you booked is actually free. Just many things that can breed satisfaction because you are designing it in. And so if you can grab hold of these design variables, you can actually create that need satisfaction, which leads to wellness and well-being.
Sounds a lot like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
It's based in part on that. So no matter where I go, people are like, oh, that's Maslow, right? Yeah. Maslow plus, yeah.
Big fan.
Yeah.
All right, so Becky, the next question is for you as the person who is the client up here. I would love to know how Symantec feels that well has it had a positive impact financially? And if so, could you talk about that a little bit? Why is Symantec investing? Because as you said, it's not cheap. Fitwell is cheaper. Tell us about Symantec's investment in well.
Thank you. So I wish I did have a better measurement around the return, which, because we were an early adopter, you don't know what you don't know when you start some of these projects. So you're either not asking the right questions so that you can get some of those measurements, but definitely investing in the health of our employees is something very important to us. And we decided to pilot the well building on our main campus. It was about 200,000 square feet, so it wasn't a small undertaking. And through that, we've learned a lot more about wellness in the workplace. And part of our objective is to really influence behaviors and raise awareness, because that's where we believe we make the biggest impact. With choice. And if you're putting fruit out, people are going to eat fruit. If you're putting donuts out, well, they're going to eat donuts. So it's really the things that you're telling your employees and how you can start to make small shifts over time to lead to better choices. And we're still learning. I'm doing case studies to really understand these things. I'm still, trying to work with Mark, like, give me some questions. What are some more things that we can do? And our challenge really is that we're on a large campus, that not all the buildings are certified. So we have a very high churn rate. So you're constantly having employees coming and going. So how do you measure that? Yeah. And that's been a really big challenge for me and everyone does want the data, and I don't have the data. I have surveys that say people have felt like 31% more innovative in the new space. But as far as financials, those are just things that we don't have that return yet. And I think it is a longer study. And without having your peer group that you're really measuring, it's difficult to do.
Can I speak to that quickly? Not as a client. So not everything that counts can be counted. So on the one hand, there's stuff that you just can't kind of get. Yet we need these measurements and we need data to be able to manage. So let me just give you, one quick example that I like to use on the WELL standard. So 7 concepts. Let's just start with a couple of the first. Air. We want to breathe good air. Light, right? We want good light. We want nourishment. So how might we measure those sorts of things? Well, clinically, within the WELL standard, let's just start with air. Here are the particulates we don't want in the air. Here's the amount of, just generally, here's the CO2 level, here's the oxygen level. So research comes out of Harvard that is detailed. Sorry, here's
It's fine.
okay, good. But just teasing. That clinically researches what happens when you don't modulate the CO2 and the oxygen in the right way. So this is in the WELL standard, and what literally happens. So it's obviously not a case here in this gorgeous all-steel showroom, but what happens is, let's think of we're in a boardroom. We're in a boardroom. We're human beings. We're adrenalizing. We're in this boardroom to make our big decision over, let's just say, 2 hours, and then we make the big decision. So after 2 hours of adrenalizing the air, blowing all the CO2 in the air, according to this Harvard study, we are numerically dumber, creatively dumber, tireder, and whatever. And so this is how we are in boardrooms in America, right? And so what the WELL standard does, it says, you know what? Just put these little filters on here more and modulate, do a little bit more what they do in, by the way, a casino, to where, the oxygen is being pumped in, and we're going to make better decisions. So now we go to Symantec, which is all about research, and we got to quantify this thing, and we want to. How do you quantify exactly making better decisions in the boardroom among the hopefully wisest people who are making those decisions? It's hard, people. It's hard. Yet we clinically absolutely know and I personally believe unless you have the standard, you won't get there, that this amount of oxygen in that room is going to help us think better and make better decisions. So that's a bit of the challenge, and you want to measure it, and some stuff you can get, and some stuff you can't exactly get yet.
So my next question is,
I'm sorry, Google COGFX, COGFX, for that data.
Yeah.
okay,
And can
It's
I-
a great website, very graphic.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
add something to this
Please.
discussion, which is, I think going the ROI direction is wrong. And it's because all of the things that you're saying, Mark, are helpful and they're proof. These are changes that we need to introduce into organizations so people can be healthy. We don't need to prove again and again and again in an organization that if we have more oxygen, you actually can be more effective. The other way is the lower the oxygen, you're going to be less effective. I mean, do we need to quantify this? And
Well, apparently, because
Apparently.
we don't do this very well almost always in our building design. So the answer, sadly, is yes, we
well,
do.
we need to get to having those healthy environments, but do we need to prove the ROI to the people who invested in it, or before the fact, guaranteeing a return?
Right.
I think this is because ROI, it's focused on direct effects. We don't track the secondary, tertiary, whatever's after that, those effects, and accumulate them. The return is great. So I would argue that it's part of the bricks and mortar.
I would say here to that, and sitting here in San Francisco and sitting around the Battery having lunch, which is a lovely thing, being surrounded by brilliant, basically young people, developing database, and the whole world feels that you need a data point. It fights against the reality of what you're talking about. Clients, people spending money today, and it's a challenge. On almost anything, say, give me the data point.
I think
And-
we
and
need to
we-
go.
And we're dealing. You're exactly right, but we're dealing with humans, and some things. What's the data point on love?
Well, let's step away from ROI then, for just a moment, and let's talk about how you establish a baseline. How do you come up with the numbers? And then I'd like to ask you, Mara, to talk a little bit about how you, at HOK, while you were working with Delos, did I say that right? Work to inform and establish the baselines in a meaningful way.
So this question of what is healthy, how do we measure it, is so important because it's important for many, many, many reasons, but it's hard because we don't always know what to compare it to. What is that baseline? How do we define health? Especially when we're working with all different kinds of organizations doing all different types of work, such that it may be that the amazing data coming out of Symantec from the experiences you guys have, my client might ask, well, is that applicable to us? And depending on the circumstances, maybe not. So we, when possible, we try to look internally within an organization to help them define what that baseline is for themselves. And the example, we talked a little bit about this in our calls leading up to this session. HOK and Delos collaborated with one of our clients who was an early well adopter. And this is a relatively unique organization or a relatively unique circumstance because at the time of this well project, this organization was doing a series of renovations, major gut renovations to a couple of different floors of the same building, and they were going to a new level of standard within design within their organization. So they had two different baselines that they were looking at. They were looking at the baseline of kind of the before condition, which is common. That's what we often look at as a baseline, and then compare that to the after condition. But there's so many other factors that get in the way in comparing those two. Oftentimes, even just the excitement of being in a new and nice space can totally goof up those results.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course it's going to be better. Of course people like it better. But in this case, what was unique here is that this organization had 2 different projects running parallel. One that was the corporate design standard, and the other that was the corporate design standard plus well, on 2 different floors of the same building with populations doing largely the same type of work. And so they then were able to compare the befores in both cases with the afters in both cases. And not only that, but they were also able to track anonymously whether or not the same individuals were actually filling out the surveys in the same circumstances. Otherwise, if you get totally different populations of survey takers, then that data really isn't nearly as meaningful. And so this was the approach that we took in that circumstance. I say we. I actually wasn't a researcher on this project, so I speak very liberally with that. But we were very excited that this was done. This was done by actual, real researchers. And so the development of a baseline in that context was incredibly valuable. And we received what we felt were much stronger results because of that.
Great. Cristina, do I sense that you have an answer that you'd like to give?
What gives you that idea? I don't know. What is, I guess the main point I want to give on this panel is that it's very hard to tease out the impact of a single change or a group of changes, because like you say, it's a mix. And unless you can do a controlled experiment like you did, and you can compare A and B, and it's all equal except for that one extra thing, that would be great. But I think the issue that we have to deal with is that there's already lots of evidence that people who are healthier actually produce more. It's not the opposite. And there are lots of studies that support that, but it's one of the largest myths held by leadership in the country. And a colleague of mine blames it on Steve Jobs. And that's because of how he ran his organization, that he pushed people beyond their limits, chewed up a lot of people, really good people, by how he managed them, and put them in environments that were very toxic, physically as well as psychologically. So this is what we're fighting now, which is a well-held idea and expectation that you have to sacrifice your health and well-being in order to get ahead. Anybody here? I don't want to. Okay. And so, and I'm really glad we're talking about these programs, Fit Well and Well, because they're all going to move us forward. This is a movement. What we have to change is our expectations about what a work life should feel like and be like, because it's actually a win-win. It's a win for the company that gets better productivity and higher performance and better outcomes, better creativity, better innovation. Frankly, all the literature is out there. And for the people, they don't get sick. They don't die of cardiovascular disease. They don't develop diabetes.
So I just wanted to add something quick to that, to the Steve Jobs torturing his employees example, and being an older guy, right, and entering the workforce, and that exactly was what was around. And so, not universally, but it is clear that boomer generation, that the millennial generation, which is who's going to occupy the buildings, who is going to run the companies, has a very, very different perspective on self-care and wellness. And these are the people coming into the buildings. And these are the people we're all designing for, and these are the people many of you are, and I'm jealous, right? That will push this forward, because we can't, and I was just down in Silicon Valley earlier today, there's a war for talent, and there's a war for the right millennials, basically, to fill these buildings. As soon as companies are responsive to these newer workers who are coming in, then we will have to change, because they will change the demands of the organization. If you are a hotshot employee, You're a woman coming in, you're 26 years old, and this company, all these companies want you, and this company says, you know what, this is how much we care for you. We care enough for you that your air, light, water, nourishment, comfort, mind, fitness, all of this, we've really figured out how to make your life better while you're in this office probably too many hours. And this company is going to do that, and this company's not going to do that. You're going to work for this company. And we're right, I believe, right at the inflection point of a lot of this, and a lot of it is because of this new generation who's getting this right. Steve Jobs got this wrong. The newer generation is getting this right. The culture is getting this right. That's going to start to dramatically impact businesses. And so that's what I see as the broader base societally of how this will play out.
So I'd like to get Becky's perspective on that, since you're right there on ground zero in the middle of a campus where you're right in the middle of the war for talent. Are you seeing the positive results in terms of helping attract and retain the sorts of people you want to have as a result of doing the right thing?
I would like to say yes, but what we do is only one part of the company. So we just feed into, I mean, people are looking at culture, they're looking at our leadership, so I feel that we're doing our part and being responsible to help in that talent war. Do I have the numbers today to support that? I don't, but I do feel that it is making a difference. I know our recruiters will always take employees down the well-certified spaces. It's super popular than obviously our other spaces. But we are just one part of what makes our company successful.
You can give us an anecdotal response. It doesn't have to all have numbers. I'm okay with it.
So yes.
Great. Okay, now I'm going to read a very uncomfortable quote, because I know, based on what you just said, you're all going to have an opinion about this. So this is from the Illinois Workplace Wellness Study. Recently found 0 benefits, quote, no lower health costs, no fewer sick days, no extra trips to the gym, no rise in productivity. Respond.
From what?
Sorry?
From what?
It's
Corporate wellness program.
the corporate wellness program. And this came from WBR's Common Health. It was a publication.
I have a quick take on that.
Yeah.
Okay, corporate wellness programs, I've worked for large companies pretty much all the time. I don't know, many of you have worked for a large program. Pretty much any large organization has a corporate wellness program. Corporate wellness programs don't work because 15% of them, and the research shows about 15% of them are utilized by employees because no one is calling the mental health hotline because they think the company is going to know it. Nobody is going to the, oh my God, you got to eat less food, something. But companies have to, as part of corporate responsibility, do these things. And so that, to me, in short answer, is why ourselves in the building community have to do things that are kind of all in. You're going to walk into the building, you're going to get a positive health benefit. You're going to walk in to the cafeteria, and the food, the Coke machine is going to be a little hidden. Is that a corporate wellness program?
Yes.
Or okay, we're going to call that. It is, of course, but I think when this statement is coming out like a typical corporate wellness program, I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but corporate wellness programs in general, you take a look at the HR community, companies spend, this will kill us in the design community, $700-ish per employee per year, right, on these corporate wellness programs that employees are not sort of doing. We wish we could have that money per employee per year, and Lord knows, let's do our part. Anyway.
Cristina.
Okay, so we just completed a year-long study about wellness programs and targeting mostly small to medium-sized companies because they comprise 80% of our economy, with 2 questions. One is, how can we increase the adoption of wellness programs in organizations? And secondly, how can we increase participation in those wellness programs? Well, after struggling with those two questions, we actually figured out that it's the best thing we can do is describe it as a fit model. What's the fit between the constraints or the requirements of a wellness program and the facilitators and barriers presented by the characteristics of the organization? So if you know what is required for a wellness program to be successful, and you don't have those particular characteristics in your organization that are required, it's going to fail. Hello. And so we have created a model, actually, and an assessment tool where you can assess your organization. What are your facilitators? What are your barriers? And some of them are, knockout barriers, like leadership support, leadership commitment, and belief in the value of healthy employees wipes out almost every wellness program. Like, don't even try, because if you don't have the backing of leadership, then you don't have the modeling, you don't have the messaging, you don't have time off to go take advantage of those things, et cetera. But even without that leadership support, there still are programs that you can do successfully. And one is education, just getting the information out to people in a variety of different ways. And the second is social organizing at the employee level, either during work time or off work time. Those are wellness programs, and it's a start. But the important thing is to really understand what's required of a wellness program and how does it match what your characteristics are. Participation, I will just say one word, WIFM. What's in it for me? So if you don't start out selecting a wellness program that people want and perceive they need, they're not going to participate. So you have to do some pre-assessment to figure out, well, what's their awareness of their health and wellness needs? How far do they want to go on this? And then you try to find a program that fits not only your organizational characteristics, but also the needs of your employees. So that's the formula. I hate to say that the problem here is there is a lack of awareness of what people actually want and need and are willing to commit to. So that's sort of a non-starter.
Okay, new question, and I'm going to lob it to you first, Becky, and then I'm
Great.
going to lob it to you, Mara. The Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, have been putting the spotlight quite a bit on the built environment, and a crucial determinant as a crucial determinant of individual health. We spend about 90% of our time inside, and so the question is, what sort of attention are you getting as a person who is responsible on the client side for creating interiors? And then I'm going to ask on the design side, how has it changed your role as a designer? But you first, Becky.
Great. So what we've done, again, we go back to our objectives of awareness and influence, and how design helps support that is ours awareness is really blatant. It's a whole set of graphics that we put on doors to stairwells that say, hey, take the stairs. Did you know if you took the stairs, this, and this, or by our hydration stations, why is drinking water healthy? We've made a very conscious choice and it's a global movement within Symantec. All of our renovations have these, and they may seem super low tech, but it's a constant reminder. It's a constant kind of in your face to really help create this awareness and a culture of awareness and why these things are important. And even as simple as taking a break, like if you're playing ping pong, it actually helps. So we put those things on the walls, like this is good for you because, and did you know, and I make sure I have all my data and my research cited and where we're getting some of this information. So those are some of the ways that the attention that we're using design to help with that.
And have you consciously started moving or asking your designers to make the stairs closer to someplace? I mean, are you actually aware of some of the physical program requirements that you're throwing at designers in order to create a more healthy sort of environment?
Yeah, absolutely. We're really using a lot of the best practices that we've learned through WELL, and we also take FitWell, I mean, as just a baseline, but those are things that are important. So as we build new projects, they're taking all those things, whether it's looking at circadian lighting or other things within the building, those have become just standards.
When did you start being aware that things were really changing? When did you really feel it hit your job?
I think within the past 2 years, you just really can't attend to anything without people talking about it. I mean, we probably started the WELL journey maybe 4 years ago.
Yep.
But within the past couple years, it's everywhere now, where it used to be kind of foreign. People were still learning about it. People, even with FitWell, people were still learning about it, but it's become like this big movement. If you don't know about it, you need to know about it. It's not going away.
Yep. How about you as a designer, Mara?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think I'm going to put this out to you guys first. How many in here are design professionals or kind of related in some way?
Most of the room.
Not, yeah, a lot of the room, but not as many as I would have guessed. Okay, somewhere in the half-ish. Now I'm really curious as to who the rest of you are.
Very important.
Very important people, I have no doubt. So anyone in the healthcare sector? Okay. So we just heard from Lisa that the CDC says that, and it's approximately 75% of our health outcomes are determined based on a combination of our physical and social environments and our lifestyle choices, which in turn are influenced in part by our physical and social environments. So that makes all of you who raised your hands the first time healthcare practitioners. So think about it, but that changes, though, the way, at least I hope, that changes the way you think about your work. And it certainly has changed mine over time. I have been interested in the health impacts of design for pretty much my whole career, which is longer than I will admit in this room. But for a long time, about a dozen years, I focused almost exclusively on healthcare design because it was the only world in which I could talk about health and not be laughed out of the room. And so over it is kind of like the last 2 to 4 years, that has been changing significantly. And so this movement has had a really great impact on my work because it means that I don't have to spend all my time in hospitals anymore, although I still love that as well, because a lot of the rest of our community has started to catch on, which is why we had to make up a new job title about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And so I definitely see this as a kind of a long-term trajectory. I started in the sustainable design movement. I guess I now have to admit this, maybe almost 20 years ago. And so
You're a kid.
We are. Yes, I am a kid. I am a kid who has several kids, but I am a kid. We are with this health and wellness movement somewhere around where we were with sustainable design and green building, and I would argue that not everyone is doing it. So we got to talk about that later. Mark mentioned that earlier. We're about where that movement was maybe 15 years ago, but in my opinion, we have nowhere near 15 years to catch up. So no pressure.
So here's a question. I did not make this question up, but I think given what we've just said about the changing role of somebody who's managing a campus or even part of a campus or designing it, it seems as though, and you just said it, now everybody in the room is expected to be a healthcare professional. Are you seeing a change in your compensation as a result of having this new responsibility?
So can Can I
Yes,
just
you
talk to
may.
that a little
Yeah.
bit as someone who ran a design magazine for many years and is really passionate for how the value of architects and designers plays out. And back to the earlier conversation about data points, I think some of the challenge for our community, which does such incredible work and changes lives and changes organizations and makes things more productive, et cetera, we haven't really had the data points, have we? And we're living in a world to where everyone sort of wants that. So in the design community, I'll get to the pay thing, but in the design community, it is us, it's a programming tradition. We start with human beings. We start with people. The real estate executives, forgive me if there's real estate executives in the room, don't start there. They start from somewhere else. You know, the lawyers who put the deals together don't. We start with the people, and then and we're about that. And we happen to be compassionate and optimists as well, right? And so somewhere along the process, it becomes just schedules and budgets, and then we haven't had that ability to follow through on that people part so that we do have demonstrable proof of the value of how we've treated people. So even before Well or Fit Well, we were doing that, and we were changing organizations, but we haven't had the mechanism. So now I'll say with Well, I believe in particular, we have these metrics. We have what should the light be. What should the light be if we want to be appropriate with circadian rhythm so that on average, not every person, not every night, my organization has human beings that sleep better. 40% of Americans don't get the right sleep. So now we as designers have to add to our competency and well, maybe not, maybe just say I'll do it to the Well standard, they've figured it out, but we have to know a little bit more about light and we have to do that. How does that translate to fees? It translates to fees and money because we are going to train ourselves to have broader conversations that move up the chain. And this is a long explanation, and I'm an ex-publisher, so I'm going to shut up in a minute. But it is because of these new conversations about the impact literally on human health. We're going to ask to have other people in meetings. We are going to ask to go higher up the chain, and there's going to be a higher interest level because all of these conversations about the values we're producing translate to not only money, but really, really big money. The other thing that is going to happen and is already starting to happen is that HR, human resources, we're going to transform ourselves as a community, having these broader conversations. HR is now going to start to be elevated a little bit because they're not just going to be about benefits anymore. It's going to be about a literalness of how do we care for people at a higher level. Becky, I'm sure you're seeing this. HR has a higher level. So that's a long way of saying once we start to have demonstrable ways to design to and prove health impact among people, then we have to ask to make more money and have higher fees. I don't see how that sort of doesn't come.
Cristina.
I think the pathway to showing greater value and that translating into better compensation is that you turn around the argument from less bad, that what you're doing is creating less bad, to more good. And what that translates into is you're increasing the capability of the workforce. And that is the argument that human resources is making, other parties within the organization are making. Anytime you can say your workforce is more capable now under these circumstances than they were before, and that translates into a lot of quantifiable outcomes. Recruitment, retention, it could be faster product development, it could be entering a new market, it could be any number of business-related outcomes. And so who are your partners? The operations people, okay? Because if you can influence how people work, and it translates into having greater capability, therefore you're going to have higher productivity, higher efficiency, higher effectiveness, that does translate into real dollars. So it's a different equation. It could be calculated by utility analysis. I know that's sort of boring to think about, as a term, but there is a way to do the calculation. If you just want to make the argument, then you tie everything you do to increasing capability. I think this is the entryway to being a player at the table and having your designs implemented.
I have another question for you, Cristina, specifically. What has the interdisciplinary approach at Berkeley's Healthy Workplace think tank revealed about the future of wellness design?
Well, it starts with this word interdisciplinary. So what we've been talking about here is what's the impact of well, or what the impact of fit well, or at least we didn't talk about sit-stand desks at that level. But and I love these points that people have made up here. Focus back on the person, because that should be the center of your universe, which is how can we create an experience for the person that will, in fact, create a greater outcome for that person. And the outcome you want to go for is they're intrinsically motivated because they want to come to work and they have a lot of talent. They want to deliver that talent in terms of the work, and they can do their best work. Let me just reflect for you the difference between what it could be if we looked at all the things that affect a person being able to do their best work, and not just the physical environment. What kinds of things frustrate you? What kinds of things create stress in your work life when you go to work? What are the triggers? And no matter how cushy your workstation is, or whether you can take a yoga class, or whatever it is that is being thrown at you as a wellness program, what are the 16 other things that are frustrating you during the day? I mean, we have to deal with the issue that we're suffering terribly from stress, job-related stress. And I just need to pitch a book. Have you seen this? Dying for a Paycheck by Jeffrey Pfeffer. And it's from Stanford, and that's okay. I like him. He has quantified what is the human cost of 10 working conditions that are toxic for people and organizations. And the number is only for those 10, it's 120,000 excess deaths a year from just working conditions. Not safety issues, none of that stuff, but it's things like excessive work demand, doing shift work, long hours, too few resources, a toxic boss. Okay, 120,000. What if that was a member of your family? So the future is we've got to look at the whole person and all of the environments that a person is exposed to.
And the point we're making is that in the design community, to your point, we're providing healthier environments, we always have, and we want to get credit for them and be part of this movement. And the one other quick thing, I mentioned a generational dynamic that's going to really fuel this incredibly. The other dynamic, back to the metric thing a little bit, is the spiraling cost of healthcare. And what's going to start to happen, and conversations are already beginning, here's an organization, here's my healthcare premiums going up, here's an entire staff who is frantic about the cost and the availability of good healthcare. What we're literally talking about is producing healthier buildings for people. And what's going to start to happen is, I believe, companies in particular that self-insure are going to be able to quantify pre-building for a healthier building, again, I believe well, and post, what happened to my healthcare costs per human being. This has to be done on a broad scales. It has to be done under a long time. When we design healthier buildings, people will be healthier, and they will be less sick, et cetera. And that is quantifiable down to the pharmaceutical.
And we could probably talk about this all night. And this has been fascinating. We had sort of thought we were going to ask a series of questions on who's responsible, and we're running short of time. So I'm going to move us to our last question. And that's asking each one of you to look into your crystal ball. And some of you do that on a daily basis. So this can't be that hard. I think all four of you, in your own ways, in your own environment, have to look into the crystal ball and see where things are going. But specifically, where do you see this impacting the design industry in the next 10 to 20 years? And that'll be our final question of the night. And any one of you can start, and any one of you can
Let's
finish.
go down the row.
All right, Mara.
Okay, I'm lucky. Well, my crystal ball says, I wish I had a crystal ball. I think that many of the things that we talk about today as being a little out there or crazy or too expensive, such as basics like including carbon dioxide sensors in conference rooms so that ventilation rates are increased when we have those big board meetings and you fall asleep at the end when you make those big decisions. Also, do not ever plan those hard decisions at the end of your flight across the country. Bad idea. So many of the kinds of things that are just beginning to gain real traction now are going to be absolutely standard practice in a certain period of time. And it will continue to push the envelope. Things like continuous monitoring, having sensors in our buildings, in individual spaces that tell us ongoing what are the CO2 levels, what are the particulate matter levels, is there lead in our water on a minute-to-minute basis, because these things do fluctuate really frequently. We're going to have those built into our design practice in a way that today feels completely inaccessible. Circadian lighting, the notion of lighting that supports our circadian rhythm is also one I think that will evolve. So, a lot of this seems a little, a little new now, even though it may be common sense. It still is new. It's going to really take hold and become, some things may not, but I think the vast majority of the things that we're talking about today will take hold into standard practice over time.
So I think I've spoken to this a little bit, but I'll throw one word out there. It's a good San Francisco word. I personally believe designing in a quantifiable way so we produce better health results will be absolutely transformative for the architecture and design community. We are going to get credit for it. Certain firms will adopt and promote it at higher levels. Certain clients, smart clients, will get it. And we will be a really important part of this huge component of demonstrably delivering health for human beings. That has to be transformative to what an architect and designer's role is. And we spoke to it earlier, we're going to make more money as a result doing the right thing.
So my thoughts are more wishes than projections, and that is that there is a greater emphasis on what people do in the workplace, and that's the place where it starts. I would like to see more partnerships between designers and the other individuals who also impact what people do in organizations and how they do their work in organizations. So for example, one way I think about it is you're the hardware in the organization. You are the physical elements of the environment that impacts people. There's a software component which comes from organizational policies, procedures, programs, et cetera, culture, leadership, management. They need to work in tandem. And that's how you're going to get a holistic, integrated, comprehensive solution. And then you'll see some really whopping numbers, I think. But I really hope you reach out to your partners because they need you. They aren't as aware of you as they should be. And so I hold out hope that you'll lead the way?
What a fun question. So I'm all thinking, I'm like, oh my God, the
You
possibilities.
can have a question.
So excited.
Your answer can be a question.
So we know technology is obviously a key player. You know, we're going to smart buildings, we're going to monitor the air. We know all these things are coming, but I think for designers, there's going to be this, you're going to start building like really weird spaces, like the nap room revisited. So before people just used to lay down, but now maybe there's like a healing power in it. Maybe you're already doing it, and I just don't know about it. But I mean, I think you're going to start taking health and wellness to a whole nother level, and just some of the great things that you get to design, and working with technology. So really seeing that emergence happening, and with the whole health component. So I'm excited.
Thank you. I want to thank this amazing panel for a wonderful dialogue. It really has been great, and let's give them a hand.
Well, we would like to just take a few more minutes. I know we're running tight on time, but if anyone has any questions, if anything we'd like to present to the panel, and you're welcome to ask the whole panel or any individual, and we can bring you the mic and see what they say.
So I've been trying to figure out a question, and I don't know how to ask the question, so I might need to get some business cards and ask you guys later, because it's more of a what is the community, and who are your partners? So one of the questions you guys talked about were topics was the return on investment, and I personally know somebody that worked for Steve Jobs, and so if you look at the short term, it was really, really great, but now the divorce is there and the child of the divorce, so how long of a timeline do we look at for the community? Is that something we wanted? Is that something we didn't want? So the time frame, and then how do we can do our best as far as designers and doing designing the best, but to be honest with you, for your social and well-being, I think the supervisor of the person is the most important person. So how do we figure out, is the supervisor a good supervisor? And I think that goes across every field. And then the other thing is, and again, I don't know how to ask a question, but a lot of us aren't designing for offices. We're designing for libraries and community centers and healthcare, and it's yes, there are employees there, but the major people that actually use the facility are not are us. So how do we do our health? So I don't expect you guys to maybe have an answer, but
So the word that comes up quickly for me is to your broad-ranging query is just culture. What we're talking about here is not only hopefully understanding and designing better spaces through the science of health, but what we're doing is transforming the culture of an organization. So to use some of the examples that are going to be in that book, what happens when a whole organization determines that it wants to really, really care about the health of its individuals? Are there still going to be lousy managers? Probably. Might they, because the culture changes to be a caring culture, start to be a bit more anomalous than they are now? One would hope. So that was the quick way I could summarize the general sense of what you were asking.
Yeah, I would like to just build on that by saying really more specifically about the design process. A lot of times when a client will ask me, well, what is the value of why should I bother? there's obviously the tangible things that have been mentioned so far, but one of the really important ones, depending on the circumstance, is that being able to use well as a platform for talking about all those other things that you just mentioned. It's almost like an excuse. Not that you necessarily need an excuse, but a lot of times you kind of do. And having that well certification, having that plaque on the wall at the door can, depending on the circumstance, be a really great piece of that process. And so a lot of times we work with our clients towards like the full certification, partly because of that, and because it does, by definition, have to engage human resources and staff across the board. It's, there are requirements part of the program through, for training and whatnot. And so, yeah, like if you have that really nasty passive-aggressive manager, like the nicest building in the world is probably not going to fix that. I mean, it might make it a little better, but it's not going to fix that. So, definitely we have limitations, but we would like to think that it can be a part of a bigger solution.
So just to talk about the management piece of it, one of the things that I think is changing is that MBA programs and other business courses are starting to integrate health and well-being topics into the curriculum. And we might, I don't know how soon, I hope sooner than when I die, that it will, turn this around and bring people to a greater understanding of the value of people and what their potential is and how to be a decent boss. What would speed that up is more training inside organizations with all managers, supervisors, to understand and appreciate efforts to make their employees more healthy and have a better sense of well-being. That is the pathway to intrinsic motivation, and intrinsic motivation is the pathway to productivity. So it's a win, but we don't connect the dots.
Okay, yeah, I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Be so close, lucky me. So one of the things I was wondering about, frankly, Freudian, when Lisa asked the question, 20 years, right, your crystal ball. My first thought was, will people be going to buildings to work in 20 years? I mean, even today, we have this diffuse, organic sense of work. Some of the smartest people I know don't go to an office ever. And they're very productive, and they're very well rewarded economically. So with the advent of the quickly accelerating, technology brings us together wherever we are. At any moment of the day, we have this outsourcing of our offices to places like WeWork and other places that is happening so fast we can't even keep up. So every day, the really best employees in our society get to choose where they want to work. And so I wonder, and then maybe this is my becoming a salesperson after being a designer, what if you pose the question, what happens if your best people in your organization, your highest producers, decide they no longer want to come to the building that you've designed?
It's happening already.
Because it doesn't serve them. What happens to the fabric of your culture, and what happens to your productivity and the casual collisions and that sort of, in communication? So I just don't see people. I don't think that half of us will be going to a workplace as defined as we do today in 20 years. Yeah. Oh, good. Okay.
I totally disagree. And I can say that actually just last week I was talking to a client who said that they used to have a total work from home policy and very, very flexible workplace, and they found it detrimental to their culture and their productivity and their bottom line. And so they haven't 100% stopped it. They still allow it in circumstances, but it definitely is not the approach that you just talked about. And they have all the tech, they're a tech company, right? So they have all the technology in the world. Maybe not what they'll have in 20 years, but it has to do with that human connection. And no matter how amazing your technology is, now, we can have VR in 20 years where we're like literally all, we could be in this room, but not actually be in this room. So, who knows? But in general, I think that there is a backlash against that, and I'm not all that concerned. I have no doubt that the type of building that people come to work in will be different. But will they work in buildings? Yeah, probably.
I have a quick take on that. That would be that there's going to be more options and versions, which you're exactly describing. And then I'll take it back to what is it to be a person? So people, humans, evolved as social creatures. We are social. People want to be where other people are. And it's a long conversation. I'm sure there's a lot of books about it. The fact that we are sort of so dependent on technology, and so, we have Facebook, we don't have as many friends in the same way anymore. There will be a greater and greater need. We can create a scenario to where we're going to want to be together in hopefully healthy and healing sort of offices. But tremendous dynamics and change in the interim, I believe.
Okay, I think we have one more question. Did you have a question? Or?
I have two. One is, a couple of you mentioned it. She doesn't need a mic.
And I'm going to note that is her husband speaking on her behalf. Thanks, Brian.
Sorry.
I had two questions because it sort of tagged onto this. One was about the generations, and Mark, you mentioned it, and I think somebody else did too, about how millennials are sort of driving this. And so my one question is, as baby boomer, does that mean baby boomers are resistant to?
It means we didn't come up with it. We're going to be lucky that change is happening.
Yeah, I mean, was it because we just felt this is the way it is, and we're just going to heads down and worker bees, and we're just going to do what we need to do, and we aren't going to rock the boat? Because I would think as a baby boomer, I would welcome this, and why would anybody push back on that? So that's one. I'm curious as to what the research has found, particularly since baby boomers are, in many instances, at the high leadership level and maybe transitioning out. And then how does this also translate to the workplace that's not white collar and professional? And when we talk about well-being and social and community and all of that, I think there's that other component that is really important. So I'm just curious as to what's happening along those lines.
I can answer the baby boomer question. What the research that I've seen and the things that I do, we're understanding that they actually aren't leaving. They're wanting to stay longer. They want to live active, more healthier lifestyles. So you are seeing that shift, that they're coming back to the workplace. I've actually seen a few of them that are retiring, but they still want to have a lot of fun outside of work, and they're doing their vacation homes. They've saved, so they have a ton of money that younger generations don't have, so they kind of get the best of both worlds. And that's kind of what we're seeing. They're staying in the workplace longer. They're not ready to go.
So to the second part of your question, this movement absolutely does not want to be healthy for the wealthy. Mm-hmm. This wants to impact every aspect of society, and again, that it lets us as the design community really have a resonance in sort of broader places. I was just in Dallas. Just a great example there is the Dallas County Records Building, which is the central building, right in Dealey Plaza, where JFK was. And so here is Dallas's statement to the world, and that huge building for everybody, mostly blue collar, walking in and out to get their building permits and whatever, is going to be well certified and give access to that sense to just sort of everybody. We're going to see hopefully a little more of that.
So can I add something about the generational differences? So we've been running some workshops with UC Berkeley students who are Gen Zs, and asking them to design workspaces from these design principles. And they're bringing fresh, new ideas about what workplaces look like. One example is they put everything on wheels, including the internal plants and trees, because what they want is variety. They want to change it up. This is only a small snapshot, but I think they are bringing something new to the table. It does not mean that we won't embrace it, because I think we will. Why have we put up with these conditions for so long? It's because we didn't think we had a choice. And I think also we've been conditioned to think about self-sacrifice. And now we're paying the price. So that is a problem, and I forgot the second question.
We'll cover it, yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have to call it a night. We're out of time. We want to thank all our panelists and our moderator. This has been a fantastic discussion. I hope we've all learned a lot and can take something back to our job. So thank you. Let's give a round of applause for everyone.